Hello, welcome to General Biology. I am John Klein. I will be your instructor for this class. Maybe you are taking an asynchronous biology course, in which case all of your instruction will be through these videos. Possibly you're taking a hybrid course, in which case your lectures are through these videos, but your labs will be in person. And maybe you're taking a fully in-person course, but you want to use these videos to help you study or to help you review things. That's fine also. And maybe you just stumbled on these videos and you have no relationship with me whatsoever. You are never going to be in one of my classes. Hey, welcome. Nice to see you. This class is about life. It's about the study of life. And we're going to just get started talking about that a little bit today. We'll talk about the syllabus in some other video. So, biology. In every science course, you need to talk about Greek and Latin roots. We're not going to have any exception to that in this class. So, biology is from the Greek roots bios, meaning life, and logos, which usually people say it's the study of, but it's more associated with the word logic, logos, logic, and you could also put in things like reason or word, so it's the words behind life, the logic behind life, the reasoning of life, and from those notions is where you get the study of life, the concepts of life. This guy right here, Jean-Baptiste Pierre-Antoine de Monet Chevalier de Lamarck, was the first person to use the term biology in the modern sense that we use it. He studied a lot of invertebrates. I think he may have even been the guy to coin the term invertebrates as well. So he was no slouch as a scientist. He's typically remembered as the evolutionary thinker that got the theory of evolution wrong, which is kind of unfair because he was one of the greatest biologists of his time, one of the greatest natural scientists, as they would have been called before he coined the term. Evolution was a concept that people were very familiar with for a long time before Darwin. Darwin was inspired by this scientist before he ever got his ideas off the ground. Most people who advocated for the theory of evolution prior to Darwin were Lamarckists, they would have been called. They would have been going with his idea. Now, his notion behind evolution was that organisms could change themselves during the course of their lives and that those changes could be passed on to their offspring. So, for example, if you went to the gym every day and you really worked out a lot, you became swole, as some people might call it. You got a lot of big muscles, that your kids would be born with larger muscles. That is not true. That is not how it works. If you take nothing else away from this video, that is not how it works. But that idea that an organism could acquire characteristics during their lifetime and then pass it on to other organisms, to pass it on to their offspring, that was the most popular interpretation of evolution which existed at the time. It was later replaced by Darwin's theory of natural selection, which we will talk about when we get to the evolution section. But he's often, like I said, thought about as this evolutionary thinker that got things wrong, where I think he should be given more credit because he coined the term biology. We're going to talk about a lot of scientists during this course because it's important to understand the historical context where some of these ideas occurred. Because some of these notions, the idea that he had, for instance, they might be misconceptions that you yourself have currently, right? The idea that organisms can change themselves during the course of their lifetime and pass those characteristics on to their offspring, that's not crazy. That's not something that people today wouldn't tend to believe. In fact, I think if you asked 50 people to explain how evolution works, some of them would still tell you that's how it works. So we're not only going to investigate the correct ideas, we're also going to talk about what ideas they were replacing at that time. We're going to talk a little bit about history along the way. the scientific study of living organisms. So what does that mean? We're going to talk about the concept of science, and we're going to talk about the concept of life as well. In the next video, I'm going to talk about that. But any field that deals with living organisms is a form of biology, which means biology includes anatomy, physiology, bioinformatics, cytology, histology, biochemistry, pharmacology, biophysics, psychology, developmental biology, genetics, botany, on and on and on and on and on and on and on. It is a big, big, big field. A doctor is a kind of biologist. A psychologist is a kind of biologist, right? All of these different kinds of fields, they're really different forms of biology. So you might be wondering why you need to take a biology course. Well, lots of different fields utilize biology for their field of study. Even if you are not going to be a pharmacist or a zoologist or a doctor or a nurse or anything, an educational psychologist, something like that, it is important to understand biology just as a citizen of the world, because at some point you or one of your loved ones will get sick, they'll get a disease. It is important to be able to understand what is going on in your body, what is going on with bacteria, what is going on with viruses, in order so that you can make decisions. You're not just getting flooded with information when it happens from a place of information, from a place of knowledge, and not just making things from a place of panic when that occurs. It is important that if you're ever sitting on a jury and you're presented with DNA evidence, you understand what that evidence is actually saying and not just making snap decisions based on what a prosecutor, for example, is trying to tell you that it says. Being informed about biology is going to help you in many areas of your life that you never really thought of. GMO crops, are they good? Are they bad? How do you know? I'm going to talk a little bit about GMO crops during this class, but you're going to have people telling you this and that in the media. You are going to be able to do some research on that on your own. So let's keep talking. There are some big theories in evolution that we're going to be discussing. One of them is cell theory. Cell theory is the idea that all living things are made out of either one cell or multiple cells, but all living things are made out of cells. Now, a cell is a unit of life. Each cell is alive by itself. So you have skin cells, you have blood cells, you have bone cells, you have brain cells. You are a multicellular organism. You're made out of many, many little cells. They all work together, and they are all alive. They're not organisms. You are an organism. You are a single organism. But each little part of you is also alive by itself. It's a cell. Bacteria are single-celled organism. It is an organism, and it is a cell at the same time. Now, the other part of cell theory is that all cells come from other cells. So when you get a cut, eventually it heals up. Where did those new cells come from that are filling in that space? Well, they divide from the living cells that are next to the cut. They fill in that space. And we'll talk about cell division, which we call mitosis, eventually. Where do we get new people from? Well, we have sperm and egg cells, and they develop from a different form of cell division, and then they combine and they form a new person. All living things, all cells, come from pre-existing cells. Now, that might make you wonder, where did the first cell come from then? If all living things come from pre-existing cells, where did we get the first cell? And we actually have a lot of interesting data about that, a lot of interesting facts, a lot of interesting experiments showing us how that may have occurred, but we've never been able to reproduce it in the laboratory. So that's an active area of research. It's called prebiotic chemistry. And it's something that if you choose to, you could do some research on this semester. We are going to talk about it a little bit later. Another important theory in science is, in biology, is evolution. Now, our current understanding of evolution is something we call the modern synthesis, and it combines three different areas of knowledge. One is genetics. Genetics was pioneered modern genetics. The basics of it was pioneered by this guy, Gregor Mendel. And he was working with flowers in a garden. And he figured out how certain traits skip generations. He figured out the mathematics of a lot of the basic ideas of genetics that we have. He figured out that it doesn't matter if you inherit one characteristic or another from a parent. It doesn't mean necessarily you'll get all of their characteristics from that parent, right? They mix and match and all that kind of stuff. To give an example of what I mean, my mom has blonde hair and blue eyes. My dad has brown hair and brown eyes. I have brown hair and blue eyes. I have a mix of their characteristics. So he was someone who figured out that kind of stuff and mathematically characterized it for the first time. Charles Darwin was the guy who figured out that species can develop if they're in competition. If organisms in a single species are in competition, resources are thin, and there's variation of traits, as in some are bigger, some are smaller, some have this coloration, some have that coloration. So you have like green beetles and gray beetles. Some are more aggressive or less aggressive. Some have good eyesight or bad eyesight, whatever it is. If some of those traits give some an advantage and others a disadvantage, then the ones with an advantage would get more food, more mates, better spots for hiding from predators, right? They wouldn't be eaten as much. They would tend to survive longer or have more offspring, and therefore they would leave a larger share of the next generation's gene pool, and so the next generation would look more like them, have more of those traits that were valuable than their competitors, and so ever so slightly the species would change. And that's how you would get change over time, and new species, or one species, could change little by little, and you can get a different species eventually. That's called natural selection. Thomas Hunt Morgan was one of our pioneering scientists studying the idea of mutation, which Mendel and Darwin, they were looking at traits, how traits are passed down, and how traits in a competitive setting can change a population. But Morgan was looking at how new traits can pop up in the first place. So that's mutation, how changes in DNA work. And then on the subject of DNA, these scientists down here did a lot of work figuring out DNA. The guy on the left, Friedrich Miescher, was the one who discovered that DNA existed at all. He was contemporary of Mendel and Darwin, but most people have never even heard of him. James Watson and Francis Crick had some propositions about what DNA looked like, and that's really important in biochemistry. You need to know what something's shaped like and what it looks like in order to figure out how it works. And then Rosalind Franklin, this woman in the middle, she was the one who actually did the experiments that proved what it looked like and what its structure was. We're going to talk about all of these people in more detail later on. This is just kind of a little preview of some of the ideas we'll be talking about in this class. So science and technology. Technology is taking scientific ideas and applying them, but science is about understanding. So the goal of science is to understand natural phenomena. What's a phenomenon? It's something that can be observed, really. So here I have a candle. I set a mood for myself before I sat down to record. And the phenomenon that I can look at here is the flame. I can see that there's light and heat coming off of this, and it's what is that? What's going on? And I can do some tests. I can put a cover on this, and I can find out that the heat and light then disappears, and suddenly you get a whole bunch of smoke. So I can figure out through an experiment that the ambient air, is required to make this happen. And I could remove the wax from the situation, and I could figure out, the fuel source is required to make this happen. And I could do all kinds of analyses, look at the soot that's coming off the candle and figure out the chemical composition of the wax, and I could scientifically, through incremental little experiments, figure out everything that's going on with that observational phenomena, with that natural phenomena. That will help me understand what's going on. But then I could take that information, develop technology with it. I could create cooking fuel, for instance, right? Like we have those little Sterno cans for keeping food warm in buffets and things like that. You could create fuel for cars and things like that if you now understand how chemical energy can be stored and burned and used like that. And you can apply this for all kinds of different things. Once you understand how something works, you can then apply it to an application giving you technology. But then once you have more technology, then it increases the number of kinds of experiments you can do, which allows you to increase your scientific understanding in another area, which then, once you understand more, you can create more technology, and it feeds back on itself. And slowly, human comprehension and human ability increases over and over. So technology and science, they're not exactly the same thing, but they are symbiotic in that way. They work together. Biology is marked by discoveries, while technology is marked by inventions. However, these two concepts are interdependent. For example, we discovered DNA, we invented DNA technology, but that technology then allows us to discover hereditary diseases, like genes that lead to, say, cystic fibrosis, for instance.